Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. I don't know about you guys listening, but there is so much talk about biometric authentication at the moment. And one of my biggest frustrations is the increasing number of stories around people making a big deal about breaking Apple's facial recognition. Yeah, sure, you get some quick and easy headlines, whether it be children breaking into their mother's phone using their own face, or twins breaking into their sibling's phone using facial recognition. But there is a huge inconvenient truth behind all those stories with thousands of shares from the usual tech websites. And that is that most hacks occur on the other side of authentication, which is something that we seldom talk about. Now, with the CEO of Equifax stepping down following an epic data breach that left SSNs, driver's license plate numbers, and other sensitive info for 143 million people, all vulnerable to hackers, I wanted to hunt down an expert in biometrics and ID systems that is also passionate about identification as a critical tool for social and economic development too. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I want to beam your ears all the way to New York City so we can speak with cybersecurity expert Francis from a behavioural biometric startup called BioCatch. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Francis. But can you tell everyone who is listening today a little about who you are and what you do?
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Francis Zelazny, and I'm the vice president for BioCatch. BioCatch is a cybersecurity company that delivers behavioral biometrics. We analyze the interactions between users and their devices in order to prevent identity theft and fraud.
Now, I always try and do a little research on my guests, and I quickly discovered that you've been involved from the very beginning when biometrics and facial recognition were far from a household term that it is today. But I also believe congratulations are in order. Aren't you set to win a Women in Biometrics 2017 award this week? I mean, can you tell me all about that?
Yes, thank you, Neil. So I did get involved in biometrics in the very beginning when nobody knew what facial recognition was, and we've certainly come a long way from an industry perspective. And today, obviously, it's on the new generation iPhone. Developed an industry, we've seen some of the amazing capabilities and possibilities that these types of technologies can deliver from a convenience standpoint, from a security standpoint, and in giving people identity when, in many places where they're not, there's no identity paradigm. And so my involvement really started early on. The company I was involved with was called Visionics. It was led by pioneer Dr. Joseph Attic in the facial recognition arena. And the company morphed into one of the largest biometrics and identification companies doing not only facial recognition, but face, iris. And we got involved in global identity management programs and in social and economic development programs, including national IDs, refugee programs, rations, as well as security programs. And all of those really were very exciting to me. And I'm very, very humbled to get the Women in Biometrics Award this week. And I want to congratulate the other awardees. And to be in such company is really an honor for me. The award is given to women who have been involved in the industry and have had a role in making it what it is today.
Fantastic. It sounds well deserved. It certainly does. I mean, BioCatch is a behavioural biometric startup, but for anyone that is actually hearing about BioCatch for the very first time, can you just help set the scene and give me an overview of what your team do, what problems you solve, and also what makes BioCatch unique from all those other cybersecurity biometric firms out there?
BioCatch is a behavioral biometrics company. Most people think behavioral biometrics is simply the way you type, so keyboard strokes. But actually, today, behavioral biometrics goes way beyond that. BioCatch technology captures on the mobile more than 2,000 parameters of interactions between a user and an application or their device. So things like the way you hold the phone, the way you toggle between fields, the way you scroll. Do you have a hand tremor? What sort of pressure do you use to, when you type? And all of these things tell the difference between you and somebody else, but it also distinguishes you from malware, from a robotic attack, or from an aggregator emulator attack. All of these are very advanced techniques that today's fraudsters use to circumvent a session. And what is most unique about the situation that we're faced with today is that 100% of the fraud occurs in authenticated sessions. So if you think about that, that's after the PIN, after the password, after the logon process, even if that involves a physical biometrics. So today's fraudsters are actually circumventing all of that and usurping the session after the login. And what BioCatch does is passively match behaviors during a session continuously, matching the behaviors that you would expect of the real or legitimate user against the fraudster, and sends an alert in real time. So that's very different than traditional biometrics, which are essentially used for login or for specific authentication at times. And also from traditional fraud prevention measures, all of which are relying on static information in order to determine whether a transaction is real or fraudulent. And so we're seeing technologies like BioCatch really able to address, using dynamic means, able to address the next generation of cyber attacks.
Wow, that's fascinating. I really was completely unaware that most of these attacks appear or occur after the actual PIN or after the authentication. That's a real eye-opener.
Most people are surprised by that.
And it also seems that everybody's after our identity now. I mean, can I ask you to expand on the growing value of our identity for hackers and why it is so valuable to these fraudsters?
So identity today is in many ways a commodity. Yeah. So fraudsters have access to different databases that are stolen. There's actually a whole underground economy that is going on with fraudsters and stolen information. So there are people that actually do the attack. There are people that aggregate the information. There are people that will parse out the information. There are people that will sell the information. And then there are people that will build websites that actually automate what to do with the stolen information, like setting up phishing emails and things like this. And so for as little as 50 cents a record, you can buy names and email addresses, and start a business, essentially, of tricking people to divulge their information. And so we need to come up with new ways in order to define what digital identity is, because clearly it's not my name, my address, or my mother's maiden name, or even my pet's name, or the street in which I grew up, all of which is available in these databases, and to start to look at additional dimensions that will distinguish real people from others that are impersonating them or using made-up information in order to apply for credit or conduct transactions.
Now, we often believe that biometric authentication itself is secure, but like you said a few moments ago, that doesn't really matter if all the attacks happen after authentication. But I think also most people forget that it's the databases that store this biometric data that are probably most vulnerable too. I mean, how far would the impact of a data breach like this, containing everybody's biometrics data, be felt, in your opinion?
So the storage of biometric data is obviously a sensitive issue. There's many emerging regulations that talk about where, how, and under what conditions to store biometric data. There are also different models of how to store biometric data so that if the database was somehow breached, it wouldn't divulge the identity of the person. So one of the most sort of accepted best practices is not to store original images, to only store templates, which are encrypted and by definition cannot be reverse engineered. But more importantly, even the templates should not be in the same data house as the other personal information. All of that being said, it is still the case that our other personal details are what's the commodity today, and what is used by fraudsters in order to trick people into doing other activities. And so what we see with social engineering is that a victim will get an email or a phone call from a fraudster with enough information that allows the victim to believe that the caller is legitimate. And so they will log in by themselves with their own PIN or password or biometric data, and they will allow the fraudster to do their dirty work. And so it's not only about the storage of the biometric data, which is definitely important. It's also about understanding the entire ecosystem in which this data operates.
Wow, I'm so glad you came on today. I'm going to ask you something else now, because I had a call from my mum the other day saying that she'd received a letter from Equifax. Now, she's not an Equifax customer, but she had the letter from them saying that her details were compromised. So as a result, they were going to give her access to Equifax services for free, which kind of felt ironic, almost like Equifax were trying to profit from their own breach. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how can Equifax customers address or overcome this compromising situation that they found themselves in?
Equifax is, may have been the most high-profile breach in the last couple of months, but certainly it is not the first high-profile breach that we've had, and it's certainly not the biggest. Yeah. So I think that the question should be more general in terms of how consumers today should overcome the situation of all of the data breaches and where they come from. Actually, since Equifax, we've seen the SEC, we've seen Deloitte, we've seen Accenture, so it's just a never-ending drumbeat of breaches. And the way that users can protect themselves is by essentially practicing good cyber hygiene. And when we talk about good cyber hygiene, we're talking about not clicking on links that come in emails. Oftentimes, those links are malware that will reside on a machine. These links will lead to software that can, like I said, malware that will sit on a machine, and it can sit dormant until there's a trigger. The trigger could be when you log into your bank account, then the malware kicks in. The trigger could be at a later date when you've sort of already forgotten that you downloaded the malware. So that's number one. Don't click on any links that come from people. Even if an email, number two is even if an email comes from somebody that you think you know, check the return address, because oftentimes fraudsters will hack into emails, or they will adopt an email address or person's name and send it so the sent from looks like it's legitimate, but it's really a fake email. And number three is that even if the email checks are correct and you don't click on a link, but you're being asked for personal information or asked for information that seems a bit out of the ordinary, really stop and think whether it makes sense. So we had a friend of mine actually runs a company, and she was telling me that her CFO got an email from her asking to transfer $40,000 to a particular vendor. And because it came from her, he did it. And she was very surprised because she said normally, even if the transaction is $500, he would ask her that if it's okay. But the email came from her email address and it said urgent, so he thought he was doing the right thing. So we all need to think about what we do before we do them, whether it's clicking on a link or conducting a particular transaction. And what we see at BioCatch is that one of the most dangerous trends in fraud is actually coming from phishing. Phishing is when a user is tricked into transferring money on their own to a fraud account. So we had a situation where, under the guidance of a fraudster, a user was opening a new bank account online and was starting to transfer money from their existing bank account to this new bank account because they were convinced that there was a hack on their original bank account. And the reason they were convinced is that the fraudster had enough personal information gleaned presumably from all of these data breaches in order to make it, look like they were legitimate. So fortunately, our system provided an alert in real time and stopped it all from happening. But these are the things that we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. Another question I was going to ask you, have you been following the building of the nationwide biometric database over in India, where I believe over 1 billion citizens have been enrolled? Have you been following that story, or any challenges or lessons that have come from that?
So actually, I've been following that story from the beginning because my former company, L1 and Morpho, actually were involved in helping to build that database. And I had done a project with the Center for Global Development to document exactly how that database was built to serve as a best practices for other countries that are looking to establish databases for national ID purposes. And I think the India example serves as a very, very good one for many, many different reasons, because here's a country where you have enormous amount of undocumented people, where you have many different programs around rations, health, employment guarantees, and others. And people don't have, if you don't have identity, then you don't have a way to access those services. And if you don't have a way to access those services, you don't have a way to improve your life. This project was actually the biggest and the first of its kind, where a developing country embarked on this type of program. And what made this program so different from other programs is that the mission of the government was not necessarily to confer benefits in putting this program together. It was really to give everybody in the country an ID number. It was called the Universal ID. And with that number, they could then go to the different agencies to apply for the services. So today, this program is the basis not only for the provision of government benefits and services, but it also serves as the linchpin for identification in opening up bank accounts. And, the link between identity and development is very clear. And I think India is giving a great example. And there are other countries since then, Indonesia and others, that have followed this example.
Now, as we approach the end of 2017, cybersecurity is continuing to be a hot topic, and for all the right reasons. But as we're looking one eye on 2018, what do you want BioCatch to focus on and accomplish in the next year?
So I think BioCatch is an enormous opportunity to build on the momentum that we've seen just in the last year and a half. I joined BioCatch in September of 2016, and in somewhat of a rerun to Visionex, nobody really knew at the time what behavioral biometrics was. They sort of equated it with, like I said, keyboard strokes, or some people lumped it in with voice. But I think that in the last year, there's been behavioral biometrics has really gone mainstream, and there's been a widespread acceptance and understanding of what this technology is able to do in the realm of cybersecurity. And so I think for the next year, I think it's incumbent on BioCatch to build upon this, to continue to demonstrate real-world results. The ROI that we've seen in using our technology in the real world approaches for large banks something like $200 million a year. There's a real bottom line aspect of implementing this type of technology. And so I think building on that, and I think promoting the use cases and looking at more ways that this technology can be used in order to address the threats that we're seeing, because they're ever changing. Every single day, it's a new malware, a new threat, a new type of attack, a new breach. And what we did in 2016 was to lay the foundation around fraud. In 2017 was to expand to use cases in identity proofing. And I'm very excited for what the prospects will be in 2018.
Fantastic. I'm sure we've really opened up the eyes of a lot of people listening today. So I've got to ask, where can anyone listening stay in touch with the latest developments at BioCatch? And also, if you've got any contact details of how they can ask your team any questions about anything that we've spoken about today.
Thanks, Neil. So we have a very extensive resource center on our website, www.biocatch.com. And on there are white papers, case studies, webinars, and the ability to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And that's probably the best way to get information and to really keep in touch. Of course, if anybody wants to reach me directly, it's francis.zelazny@biocatch.com.
Well, I appreciate how busy you must be this week, and let me be one of the first people to congratulate you on those incoming awards. But more than anything, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to come on and share your story and your expertise and insights about everything that BioCatch are doing. I really appreciate it, so thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Neil. I really enjoyed it.
I think that Francis is uniquely positioned to provide these incredibly valuable and key insights around what companies like Equifax should have done to prevent an attack of this magnitude, and also the use of identification as a critical tool for social and economic development. Now, I really enjoyed chatting to Francis today, and if you take anything away from this episode, I think it should be that we all stop worrying about what happens before authentication and focus more on our activity after authentication. But remember to keep those tweets and pics of where you listen to the show coming in to @NeilC.Hughes. And if you want to share your insights about today's episode or indeed any of the recent topics that we've covered, remember you can email me at techblogwriter@outlook.com. But I have a long queue of guests waiting outside, so I'm going to grab a quick breather now and return to see you all tomorrow and try and brighten up your commute with a song, a dance, a smile, and maybe a podcast too. So a big thank you to each of you for listening today, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.